today we're Kyle Racki. He's the co-founder of Proposify. It's a company in Halifax in Canada. So welcome to the show, Kyle.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy. Good to be here.
Cool. So the reason why we got you here is I've been watching a lot about your LTV videos. It's a channel that you have on YouTube where you talk about SaaS in general. But there is one piece of content on which you're really strong is everything that is sales related. So from doing sales qualification or sales scoring up to presenting and then doing demos and closing people. So there's a lot of things that you have learned in a year going from the agency standpoint to now where you are. Can you tell us a little bit about all the learning that you had along the ways?
Yeah, I wish that I had have just somehow magically known all this stuff. Usually when I try to put content out, I try to put out what did I want 6 months ago that wasn't there, and then what did I learn, and how can I then share that with others? So that's absolutely what I've been doing with the sales content. Is all of these things a year ago or 2 years ago or even 2 months ago I was completely clueless about, and then I talked to really smart people, implemented it with people on my team, or they told me what we should be doing, and then we tried it out. And then once I kind of have it under my belt, then I try to share it with other people so that they can benefit from it as well. So that's absolutely what I've been doing. And I really had no idea how to build a sales team, what a sales process looked like, how to run commissions, how to set quotas, all those things. So now that we've been doing it for about a year and a half, moving up market for our SaaS product and building out those sales processes, that's what I'm sharing with others.
Do you mind sharing how much revenue you guys are making at the moment?
Yeah, sure. So we just passed 7 million in annual recurring revenue.
Amazingly cool. So obviously this process of going from almost 0 to 7 million a year took a lot of learning. Are you okay if we actually go in step and then try to figure out what happened and some of the key learnings as we go?
Totally. Let's do it.
Cool. So let's start with the beginning. You probably didn't start with a sales team. From what I understand, you actually were the person doing the sales yourself, and at some point you had to start hiring a sales team. What are some of the key learnings that happened here, and how fast did that happen? This transition happen?
This was a very long, slow, painful process to get here. And I still don't think we're there yet. I still think that we have a lot of hurdles to get through, but I'll try to share a few of them. So the funny thing was, because my co-founder and I came from running an agency business, which you as the founder or the agency owner have to sell 100% of every new client that comes in the door. We didn't want that anymore. When we transitioned to SaaS and sold our agency and started Proposify, we really wanted to create a low-priced, self-serve, automated kind of company, and we were pretty successful for that. So we didn't even, they say founders are the first salespeople. We didn't really sell a lot of accounts. We were pretty good at marketing. We built a good product, and we just tried to offer really great customer service, and that alone was what helped us scale up to that first couple of million in revenue. But then we started to realize, I think around 2017 was really when we knew we needed to do this, was for SaaS companies, it becomes incredibly difficult to scale a big business out of little customers. And certainly there are examples of SaaS companies that have done that. But when you look at some of the most successful ones, often what they need to do in order to become a 100 million ARR business is to move up market and sell to enterprise. Tons of examples of that, of course, from everything from Slack. We think of Slack as kind of a small business tool, but they sell to very large sales teams, and that's helped them build such a massive recurring revenue. So we knew that we needed to pivot and to try to sell to slightly bigger businesses. And in order to do that, we had to build a sales team. And so we actually did what most people recommend, which is smart, is don't hire a VP, go and try to hire a VP of sales. Start with 2 sales reps, hire them yourself, and then just let them, kind of learn on their own, learn from you as the founder, watch what they're doing. And then with 2 reps, you can kind of see what's working and what isn't. If one is successful and the other isn't, well, then that, okay, someone can be successful. So now we need to hire more people like that successful one. If neither are successful, then there's a few problems. Maybe your product isn't ready yet. Maybe your positioning is off. Maybe the market doesn't see you as a higher priced product. So we did that for a couple of years with 2 sales reps. Neither were super successful with it. And I think there was probably a number of reasons for that. We tried to hire one who was kind of a scrappy startup person and one who was, more of an enterprise salesperson who had come from a bigger company, just to try two out. And we found that they really kind of neither of them worked out too well. And that was probably our fault. We probably weren't giving them the tools they needed. The pricing wasn't right. It was harder to scale up pricing because we had fixed pricing as opposed to scalable pricing, which, is a whole other subject. Then in 2018, we hired a VP of sales who used to be a sales director at Salesforce. And we also had just gotten funding. So really, we were kind of at the point now where we thought, okay, we have somebody who's done it. We have the funding for this person to go out and hire. And this is going to be easy. Getting to 10 million ARR is going to be a cakewalk. And we got about a year into it, and we still found that we had this big sales team, but we didn't have any of the processes figured out. They weren't super successful. We might get a big deal in every now and then, but there was nothing we could scale. And so we actually let a lot of them go. We let the director go. And then we actually just promoted somebody who was in the team who really had his stuff figured out and promoted him to run the team. So that's really what we've been doing for the last 6 months or so, and seeing actually better success with a smaller team and all those learnings and lessons behind us.
What was some of the key metrics you were looking at in order to figure out is that's working or not? Because you seem to be very focused on processes, on scaling things more than just looking at the MMR.
Yeah, well, so we have a blended model of MRR, and I think that's actually what makes it really complicated, because we have a fairly steady stream of very small customers who come in, see our pricing, sign up to a free trial, and then a certain percentage of them sign up to a paid account. None of those touch the sales team.
Yeah,
so
it's a self-service kind of thing.
It's a self-service model, and that's all well and good, and that helps, but because we can still grow without sales closing every deal. But if we want to have a sales team, if we want to sell some of these, $50K a year, $20K a year type of accounts, you need sales, and you also need leads, and you need pipeline for that. So it's no good for the sales team to be sitting around costing you money, not being happy because there's no leads, or they can't push them through the funnel, or they lose deals because we don't have the right security compliance, or we don't have the right feature or the right integration, and all these kind of product issues. That's what makes the sales process really hard. The process isn't so important as it is figuring out what works. So like, if we can get 2 or 3 reps massively successful, hitting their quotas or exceeding their quotas, and then we can reverse engineer that into a process, that's the goal. It's not so much on trying to craft this beautiful sales process that looks really good on paper if we know it doesn't, we don't know if it works.
So you went from what works into making that a process instead of actually saying, oh yeah, this is a process we're going to follow and then try to make it work.
Yeah. So like, one of the first things, this is why we promoted Daniel to the sales director, was because he had come. So he, first of all, to give him a little bit of context, Daniel Haybear is our director of sales, and he came from 3 prior startups where he had worked with the CEO to kind of build these sales processes from scratch and grow to kind of 0 to 1 million ARR. So this is probably the biggest company that he's worked at, because he's used to working at like really, really tiny startups. But unlike, say, a VP of sales who's come from a company like Salesforce, right? These people we kind of put on a pedestal and think, oh, they know their stuff. They've seen how real SaaS companies work. But the thing I think that we forget is that they had the added benefit of their selling Salesforce. They already had the processes figured out. They had the brand in the market, and it doesn't take as much work or talent to necessarily be a sales director in Salesforce.
Got it.
So we made that kind of mistake of thinking, oh, somebody who came from that background obviously knows how to build it for us. And that's not entirely true. The second thing, though, was like when Daniel started with us, he was a sales enablement manager. And what he started doing was what really your sales director should be doing at a smaller SaaS company, which is listen to the calls that the AEs, the account executives, are making, and coach them. Give them regular coaching every single week. Build out some documents for them that help them with the sales process, so that you can kind of, what he did was he looked at what does our qualification decks look like? So when, an SDR is on the phone with somebody looking to buy or looking to demo, what's the script that they walk through to kind of qualify that they're a lead, dig into their pain, and then figure out at the end of the call, okay, are we going to move ahead and book a demo or not? So really what he did was he just attacked every stage of the sales process one at a time. He didn't try to figure out the whole thing from the beginning or from scratch. And we really liked that approach.
Did you, was there one part of the funnel that was weaker than the others?
Yeah. So the first part that he looked at as far as like what is going to give us the quickest win is how do we hand off better leads to the AEs? So that's why he attacked the disco decks, the discovery decks, and worked on that, and then measured it to see if the changes they were making based on the call. So he would listen to a call, figure out where leads were getting hung up or where people were obviously not getting it or they were taking over the call. And then he would work basically to improve the talk track and help and coach that SDR to deliver the talk track better. And then once that was sort of at manageable levels where you go, okay, that, we've moved the ball a little further ahead here. Then he would look at, maybe it's further upstream and go, okay, the BDRs who are making all the outbound calls and all the outbound, like they're not being successful. They're not really handing leads off to sales. Let me listen to their calls. Let me see what they're doing. Let's try and tweak different messaging. Let's buy an email list and A/B test 2 or 3 different subject lines and figure out what gets us better open rate. So he would look at that part of the process. So really, and he would just continue to do this. Now, this was before he even took over the sales team. When he took over the sales team, then we had to figure out new quotas, new commissions, what the structure is going to be like, because what we had before was a mess. And so he and I worked together to try to figure that out.
Yeah, let me come back quickly to, you mentioned at some point the SDR. When were the SDR hired in the process? Would you hire that earlier, later? What was the deal here?
Yeah. So everybody has a different meaning that they put to SDR, BDR. Yeah. Some people call, inbound qualifiers BDRs. The way we did it was we considered somebody who was an outbound sales rep who was just working to prospect an outbound BDR, and then the inbound people were the SDR. So they are the ones who somebody comes to the website, they fill out a demo request, or they go to the pricing page and ask some questions. That SDR, their job is really to try to get them on a call to qualify them. And then if they're a sales accepted lead, then they would be handed off to an AE to demo. So just a little clarification in terms. Now, in terms of when we hired them, we kind of had a blended approach. We had account executives who demoed and closed that also did a bit of their own prospecting and also a bit of their qualification. When our VP came on board, one thing that she wanted to do was sort of split off these roles into specialties, which makes a lot of sense. But I think where we fell short was we didn't have all of those processes figured out yet, so they were repeatable. So if I were to do it again, what I would do is actually just hire a couple of salespeople who do everything from qualification through to close. And then once they're really successful with it, like say if they figure out prospecting and they figure out how to build their own leads, then you can hire a kid out of college and basically teach them that, give them the script, give them the process, and plug them into it. Let them figure it out. The SDRs though are very important because and this is specific to our company. It may not be right for everyone, but we get a high volume of leads coming in every day. We have somewhere around 200 or 300 new free trials that start every single day during the week. Not to mention demo requests or people filling out lead capture forms or lead magnets or things like that. So we have so many, quote unquote leads coming in, it would be impossible to hire enough people and be able to afford it to have them go through every single lead. So we need to do a little bit of automated scraping using tools like Clearbit to try to figure out what size they are. Because really the hardest thing for that SDR is to just figure out, is this a good enough lead that I'm going to hand them to the sales rep or to the AE?
Got it. So at the beginning, you recommend, it's a little bit like engineers, you got full stack engineers, the one that could do the back end, the front end and everything. And that's really how you would actually kick off, a sales team. You will try to get salespeople who can actually operate the entire process.
It's funny you say that. I've used this analogy internally a lot because my background is actually much more product than it is sales. If you're starting a brand new startup from scratch, and you just can't even afford it. Or even if you could, let's say you raise $10 million and you can afford it, you probably still wouldn't go out and try to build immediately 100-person engineering and product team, right? Because you don't even know what you're building. You don't know what the customer wants. And it's actually harder to build something really good with that many engineers. What you need to do is take a small core team who are very diverse in their skill set, and they can do a lot of different things and work a lot on customer discovery and listening to customer calls and learning from them. And then you kind of figure out what to build. And once you kind of have product market fit, you can scale up. It's actually virtually identical with a sales team. If the thing that made it so difficult for us was that we had about 13 or 15 salespeople without any kind of process figured out. We didn't know what worked, what didn't, who our ideal customer profile was, what language resonated, what our positioning was. We didn't know really any of that for that upmarket crowd. And so it was actually harder with that big team. So I think if you're starting a brand new sales team from scratch, you're better off going very small at the beginning, get some diverse people who don't mind picking up the phone and prospecting. That's key. There's a lot of salespeople out there, especially ones who have the big company experience. And they just want to wait around for marketing to hand them leads. They don't want to go build their own. So you have to kind of find people that are hungry enough and scrappy enough, and also are coachable enough that they want to improve and they want to get better.
Yeah, it makes sense. At some point, those people who are able to, pick up the phone, create their own opportunity, and then go ahead and then close them. At some point, your company is going to specialize into, okay, now you only do this part, you only do this part. Do you actually tend to promote those people, like a little bit like Daniel, or do you actually have to let them go? Like they have their sort of operational bandwidth between, 0 to 1 million. And then after that, they are not as efficient as any other, salesperson.
That's a great question. The great thing about sales is that it's actually much simpler than product and engineering, because for instance, with engineers, you might have somebody who really likes front end and they really love CSS and making things look amazing or tweaking animation. You might have back end developers who are like really into server side infrastructure, or maybe like machine learning. That's kind of their interest. And so with those guys, you kind of want to give them the projects you think that they'll be really good at, because that's where their skill set lies. With salespeople, it's actually much more of a linear progression. So, when you find that first group of salespeople, if you find any are really good, almost none of them want to continue prospecting or doing cold outreach, right? Like that work is not fun. It's very hard. You get a lot of rejection. Some people are good at it, and you might find the odd freak out there who wants to do that for the rest of their life, but chances are they're going to want to progress, and they're going to want to just be an account executive and demo and close, right? So the introductory role, so if you're hiring somebody brand new out of college with no experience, you give them the BDR position. They're going to slam the phones. They're going to cold call. You're going to probably let a lot of them go because they're not very good or they don't like to do it. And then when you find a few that are really successful, you basically give them a very clear career path and progression and say, like, if you hit these numbers within this amount of time, you automatically get moved to an AE position. But even then, the AE position is broken out into several tiers or segments. So somebody who's like a tier 1 AE, they'll have a lower quota in terms of what they need to hit. And they'll also have a lower commission. And then once they prove themselves within that certain amount of months, they can then move up. So then really it's great, because if you're an AE who's amazing and skilled, those guys tend to move around a lot, especially in SaaS, especially in competitive markets. So you don't generally want to keep those guys in one role for too long, or they'll just move to another company that's going to pay them more money. You want to give them that, like, oh, if you reach like senior rock star AE, you're making more money than the CEO. And that's a little hard to reach for, but it gives them something to go after.
Mm. Was that hard to actually put all those, quota to reach when you actually had no experience with sales at the beginning? How did you actually manage to figure out, oh yeah, this is how much you need to reach at each level?
Quota is extremely difficult to figure out. And it's actually, it's hard to know until you have some level of predictable sales coming through your sales team. So generally speaking, you're going to have to rewrite your quota on a regular basis, maybe every 6 months, maybe every 12 months. You come up with a new comp plan that's more based on reality, because let's face it, we have year targets, but especially if you don't have that sales process figured out, you might be anticipating more or less than you can do. Usually you're anticipating way more than you can actually reach. So the thing is, when you're still in figure it out mode, it's not really fair to the reps to just give them this random quota that they have to hit and then hold them accountable to hitting it and punish them if they don't. What we found, and kind of like our internal belief about it, is that when you're still figuring it out, whether you're a startup or you're like us and you're kind of moving around markets, you should put most of the risk on the company or the founders, right? Because it's not fair to the reps. So it's actually probably better to overcompensate them with a salary and still give them a commission, but don't be as hard and rigid about hitting quota. Once you've got that process worked out and a little bit more, that people who do certain things and follow the process can hit their quota, then you can start to get a little bit more punishing and so basically let reps go who don't hit quota. Well, like what we do, for example, is, and we only started doing this recently, which works out pretty well, is if you don't hit quota, you get a lower commission. And once you pass that quota threshold, now suddenly you get your full commission. And then if you sell any more than your quota, like I think 10% more than your quota, that revenue that you sell, you actually get a much higher commission on it. So we call those accelerators. They basically give the AEs a lot of incentive to over deliver and not just kind of pack it in as soon as they hit quota for the month.
Okay. Let me switch the angle a little bit and talk about managing the sales team. What are some of the key findings that you discovered, as you were growing about, how you need to manage your salespeople?
Yeah. So like where I don't directly manage the reps myself, it's my sales director. I can't comment too authoritatively on this, but Daniel and I are in talks every day, and we meet up, at least once a week or more to kind of talk about how things are going. What Daniel usually does is he gets me involved when there's big changes that are happening, whether it's a new comp plan. One thing that we did, for example, just recently was we said, okay, we had a really bad summer for the sales team. Self-serve was pretty well consistent, but the sales team itself, they just didn't have a lot in their pipeline, and they were starting to get a little bit down and a little bit just morale wasn't as good as it could be. And some of that is because, salespeople, part of their compensation is on performance and hitting numbers. And you can't really have sales reps that are worried about paying bills or they're worried about not making a lot of money. So what we did is he kind of worked with me on this and said, let's basically top off their OTE, right? Their on target earnings. So if they don't quite hit quota, we'll actually top it off and give them the commission for it, but we'll only do it for 3 months. And what this does is it helps them get through the summertime without worrying too much about paying bills. But on the other hand, the expectation is you're going to be prospecting, you're going to be building pipeline, and this is kind of like a draw. So my point being, whenever there's anything substantially different or changing in the sales team, then I'll be there with them kind of talking through it. But day to day, really, it's Daniel is sitting down with the sales reps. He's given them coaching every week. And there's not a ton of them right now anyway. So it's not too arduous at the moment. He's working a lot on kind of like revenue ops, working with the head of our SDRs to just kind of figure out how to measure things a little better in Salesforce. But, as far as managing reps, I think there's a stereotype about what salespeople are like, especially really successful ones, that they're maybe cocky or confident or super outgoing. We've actually found that there's a wide variety of different sales reps. You can't really paint them all with the same brush. Absolutely. They love money. They love to close deals. They love to get well compensated. But, often the quiet ones, the kind of introverted ones are amazing salespeople. They're very thoughtful. They're very strategic about how they run their deals. So really, yeah, there's some that are extremely, they come across as very confident, but they're also really hard on themselves. And when they listen to their own calls, they say, oh, that's where I screwed up. I'm going to change that next time. The only ones you really don't want are the ones who are not that good, and they're also arrogant and they don't want to change. They don't want to take direction. They don't want to change the talk track. And we actually had somebody in our sales team, one of the first ones that we hired, who was just completely uncoachable and the worst thing was she didn't want to share anything with the rest of the sales team. So if she was actually successful or closed a deal, she didn't want anybody to learn from her because she wanted to be the best on the team. She had to go.
Yeah. Yeah. She passed the recruitment process. What do you think went wrong here?
My co-founder and I kind of disagreed on.
It's a typical disclaimer.
I mean, it was experience, and she was a top rep at a past company, so that was, on paper looked very good, and was actually a pretty good salesperson as well.
Yeah, it's just this unfortunate drawback that actually is no go.
I mean, it's no different than you hire a 10x programmer who's an arsehole and makes everybody miserable, right? Like, it doesn't matter how good that engineer is, if they can't work with people or they make other people upset and not want to work with you, they have to go.
Makes sense. So, Kyle, give me your top 3 tips for hiring a salesperson.
Ooh, good one. Top 3 tips. I mean, I would say don't overvalue experience, because some of our best sales reps have come from retail, or they've come from a completely other industry. I find sales is one of those things where it's usually not what somebody starts their career wanting to be. Usually people fall into sales because they just happen to find it and they're good at it. Career salespeople certainly exist, but especially when you're trying to build a new team and you're not able to hire somebody who's been, top rep at number, 1 company. You'd be amazed at how sometimes somebody who, came from a completely different career is actually really good at sales. As I said before, somebody who's very coachable, who wants to get better, and they're competitive in all the right ways. They compete with themselves. They maybe compete a little bit with other reps, but at the same time, they have that kind of team attitude and they want to win as a team. As a side point, I think that introducing spiffs, which are like the bonuses and the rewards, like free trips or free dinners for hitting certain kind of numbers or activities, I think those work really well because salespeople do tend to be competitive. They want to win. So that's kind of a way that you get these reps kind of competing in a way that's not backstabbing, because that's what you don't want, is the ones who just want to hide what they're doing and don't want anyone else to see what they're doing. I mean, those are 2 tips. I'm struggling for a third.
That's okay. Don't have to find a third one. As a side note, when I was working at Electronic Arts, we had a big picture of Rambo, like a 1-1 size. And that actually went to the sort of employee of the week or of the month of whoever was actually doing better at XYZ. So it's sort of recognition without necessarily any money attached or anything.
I like that, Rambo. Yeah, and our sales director also posts in the team channel, not across the whole company, but in the team, who's on the leaderboard for the month, like who's the top, who's closed the most sales, and that's just that little extra, like, everybody wants to be number 1 on the scoreboard.
All right, cool. So you also had to fire a few people, unfortunately, in that process as you were, learning or taking some of the key learnings in sales. Do you have any advice on how to fire a salesperson?
I mean, it's not a whole lot different than firing anybody else. I mean, we've
Mm-hmm.
certainly fired people across every department at one time or another. Firing in general, I find that, and I've actually learned this from our HR manager, which is actually don't go into a lot of detail when you do it. The person, once they kind of realize the decision's been made, they just want to kind of figure out how they're going to move forward and get out. Like her big thing is like, give them the news, make it very clear, let them know that the decision's final, and then basically figure out the transition till it just get them out of the building. Like, give us your laptop, give us your keys, all the logistical stuff. It doesn't do a lot of good to give reasons. Usually they kind of know anyway. It also does open you up to certain liabilities or depending on where you live, what the laws are. So it's usually good to do it very, very quick once you know. And that's the unfortunate truth of it is that, everybody's going to get fired, whether you're, especially in sales, the top rep or not, whether this is your 10th sales job or your first, every sales rep is going to get canned at one point in their career. And, to just kind of take it as a lesson and figure out what happened and moved on. We had a sales rep who was remote and had, a lot of experience and a lot of success under his belt. And, it was really just us. It was our product was harder to sell at the level of deals that he was trying to sell, like super enterprise companies. At one point, we just figured, okay, there's just no pipeline here. Like, it's not going to make sense. So the other thing too is that you want to try, and again, it depends where you live, but in Canada, where I'm from, there's actually not that much of severance you need to pay someone. It's, I think, 2 weeks or so. So if you were to let somebody go, you're required by law to give them what they call pay in lieu or something like that, which basically is two weeks of pay for it. We always try to go a little bit above that. Sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 4. If the person's in a really senior position where it will be hard for them to get another job for quite some time, we might even pay 2 months or so. So a lot of factors, but generally if you pay more than you're required to in severance, then at least, that person's probably going to hate you for a little bit. It's like breaking up with a spouse or a boyfriend or a girlfriend, but in time, they'll see it was the right move, and they'll also not talk too badly about you to other people.
Yeah, got it. All right, so we talk briefly about how hard it is to put compensation in place. Did you have to revisit that in something that is less advantageous for one of the salesperson and how they took it? And do you have any way of dealing with that?
Yeah, the compensation side, I mean, I think I always envision it to be much more complicated than it is, especially in terms of tracking and how you do it all. But I mean, essentially, every rep knows what they're closing in a given month. They know when they close a deal and they know how much, and it's all tracked in Salesforce. So it's easy to find. And essentially once you've set out what that quota is, you pay out that compensation or that commission on usually a monthly basis through your payroll system. So it's not like there's a lot of juggling of spreadsheets and a lot of complicated ways to actually pay it out. I think what is so far working pretty well is the idea of the accelerator. So that idea of, okay, if a sales rep's, if their goal is to say close $50,000 a month in sales, but they only hit 40 of it. Well, they're only going to get, say, these aren't real numbers, just kind of making them up. Let's say 8% commission, right? Now, as soon as they hit 50, if that's the quota, well, then they instantly go right up to the 10% or the 15%. And then if they sell, say, 70,000, well, you'll take that extra 20K that they sold and you'll put a 20% commission on that. So once you figure out the amounts, which, it's complicated as the sales team grows, but if it's only a handful of reps, it's pretty easy to figure out. You just throw that on their paycheck or run it through your
Did
payroll.
that happen at some point that you were like over generous? Like, for example, you started with like 40% and suddenly you had to come back to 20 because obviously that doesn't work with the math.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think the first sales reps that I can't remember exactly what we did, but I think it had something to do with the currencies. We were paying them, basically American currencies on Canadian prices or something like that. They were getting a little bit overpaid. And the other thing too is that there's little things like, if they close a monthly deal, do they get that commission every month for the lifetime of the customer, or do they get it for the first year? And that stuff gets really complicated. What we do now is we basically don't commission on anything that's monthly. The reps are required to go out and sell annual contracts. In certain circumstances, if they get permission, they might be able to close a 6-month renewing contract or something. But that makes it much simpler, because you basically charge the client for the year and pay the commission out to the rep for the entire year. And then, you might revisit it. I think that's the whole thing, is that it's always going to evolve. So whatever you're doing right now, you might have to come back and change it. And generally, if you explain to reps like, hey, we're changing the commission structure, here's why, here's what we want to do, and you make sure that it's not a complete loss to them. Like, basically, we're just removing all the upside for you guys. If it's a little bit of a, it's a win-win on both sides, then they're generally quite receptive to it.
Okay, so the advice would basically say, nothing is final. It's just, for this quarter, this is the quota we're going to put in place, and the compensation we're going to put in place, without necessarily saying this is, for the rest of your life.
Yeah, like it's kind of like a price change for a customer, right? If you need to increase somebody's price, you give them some notice
in the team.
Yeah, like you would give them a bit of notice so that, okay, your price isn't going to change today, but we're going to change it at the end of the month or at the end of the quarter, and then this is how much it will be. And I think it's one of those things where commission plans are always going to get adjusted and reconfigured. We always put it in a document and have the reps sign off on it, but we talk to them first and get their verbal buy-in before we do it.
Okay. So let's switch gear a little bit and take me through a successful demo. What do you expect from one of your account executives to do in order to have like that perfect demo?
Yeah, so I think the first thing you do, and this is kind of under the assumption that your SDR has qualified this opportunity. The lead it's a good lead that you're demoing. What our AEs are supposed to do is, first of all, just verify everything that the SDR, passed on, or what they talked to them about last time. So for example, if it's, whatever product, you'd be saying, hey, Jeremy, so, last time we talked, I know you talked to Laura on our team, and she mentioned that the amount of time it takes for you to send out proposals, like it's really the time aspect is the biggest reason why you signed up to this and what you're interested in. Is that still the case? So you kind of get them to repeat back to you what their pain is. The one thing that we always do and we teach our reps is the upfront contract. So that's where, what happens a lot in these demos is sometimes people take the customer or the lead takes over the call, and they start saying, do you have this feature? Do you have that feature? Just show me the product. I just want to go through it. And that's the biggest way you kind of lose them, is they've just taken over and now it's just a training session. So in order to kind of keep control of the call, one of the things that the reps do is they say like, okay, so, we talked about this pain, and this pain. That's still the case. Yes. Get you to confirm it. Okay, we're going to go through this in 30 minutes. I want to make sure that, we're still good for time. And then at the end of the demo, if this makes sense, then what we can do is whatever next steps are. Are you good with that? So it's just kind of like, it's almost like telling them what you're going to go through, tell them what the expected outcome of the call is, and then get them to verbally say, yes, I agree. And that's what we call the upfront contract. And once we do that, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. We try not to dig too deeply into all the technical features of the product. We try to align, or rather I should say, we try to stick to only 3 features. We have a pretty standard templated way that we go through those features, and we map them always back to pain. So you remember how you said that it was the manual entry that was really taking your reps a long time? Well, this is the feature that actually removes that manual step from that process. Is that good for you? Is there anything else, you want to know about that? Asking them questions, making sure that, there's a good balance of talking. So like the rep shouldn't do all the talking, but also the lead shouldn't take over the call. So by the end of it, actually, we can demo the product very quickly. We have reps that can demo in 5 minutes, where a lot of the time on that demo should be is at the end, questions, discussions, and that kind of thing. And then the last piece of it really is setting up next steps and having the rep ask them what their buying process looks like. Because so often we want to get their credit card and just close them right on the phone, but they're like, well, okay, before we do that, our VP has to sign off on it. It has to go through security review. So what reps need to ask is to say, okay, so let's say, from the sounds of it, you're liking what we're showing. What happens from here? How do we go about onboarding you into this? What does your buying process look like? And they'll literally tell you what has to be done to close. And the rep just has to basically write that down. And then now that's the next thing. Okay, so the next step is security. So who's your head? Who's going to sign off on this? Johnny? Okay. What's his email address? Is it just Johnny at, company name? Get his details, really try to push it. The worst thing that they can do is just say, okay, that's great. Have a good day. I'll be in touch. And then try to follow up with them later, really get next steps narrowed down and established.
Yeah, so you do a virtual sale with them.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that term, virtual sale.
You can use that. How do you actually get someone to be trained to this system? Do you have things in place? Is there a process people has to go through, or are they just thrown into the fire and off you go?
No, actually, I think we're pretty good about employee onboarding. We've nailed down quite a few processes for that. In addition to just general orientation within their first week, which every employee would go through, which involves meeting with different department heads, just learning more about our product, maybe jumping on support and that kind of thing. We use Lessonly, which is a kind of like an e-learning tool, where we've put entire courses together on how to prospect the Proposify way, how to demo the Proposify way. So we run them through the video training, and all the video training actually requires a video from the rep. So on certain questions, it might say, upload a video of you pitching us on Proposify. And then they have to record that, and that goes in as an answer. So that's kind of one of the ways. Nice. Most people don't, most of the reps won't begin by doing demoing and kind of account exec work unless they happen to be really experienced. So prospecting activities, they'll be doing some of that. And then we use a tool called Chorus. I think it's chorus.ai maybe. That is, it records all the calls, and it's a way to easily look up who made the call and listen in on their phone call. And that's really used as a coaching tool. That's the number one thing. If founders don't have a VP of sales or a director of sales, that's the number one way that they can influence those early reps when they're building a team, is just listen to every phone call. Yeah, it takes a lot of time, but that's how you actually get better as a team, and you learn what's resonating and what's not.
Do you do it 2x?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And to a certain degree, you can listen to the beginning and listen to the end. You don't have to listen to the whole thing. Because if the ending is going good, it's how they set it up and positioned it at the beginning.
That's smart. So what are some of the key metrics that you as a CEO want to see, from that sales team?
So the number one, of course, is revenue, but then you kind of have to reverse engineer that back. How do you get to revenue? Well, you have to have pipeline. And so if you know, for example, in your 90-day pipeline, if our goal is to close as a team $100,000 in revenue, well, then that based on your close rate. So if we get an opportunity in the door, we know that maybe 50% of those will close. Then you actually need to have double of that amount in the pipeline in order to hit your quota. So when we're measuring what we call forecast coverage, then we'll know that, okay, our goal is to hit X in revenue. So it means that we need to have this in terms of pipeline. And if we only have 10% of our pipeline covered for the next 90 days, guess what? We're not hitting our quota. So this is something I only learned recently through Daniel, this is a really important metric to measure, because we all like to think we're just going to pull it out of nowhere and say, yeah, we'll hit our numbers. We'll just keep doing our thing. Well, no, if you only have 10% of your pipeline covered for the next 90 days, then you need to do some prospecting right away if you want to even hope to get close to that number. And then the other thing is we've started trying to measure more the percentage of MQLs to what we call SALs and then SQLs or SQOs. So this was a problem we had before. We thought, well, there's 500 MQLs a week. How can we say that there's no leads? Well, if you actually measure what makes up an SQL or a sales accepted lead, the MQLs they're not good enough. They're too small, or they don't have budget or whatever. So when you know that like 99% of your MQLs aren't getting accepted by sales, then you've got to move even further up market, as we did, and say, or rather upstream, and say, okay, we obviously have a positioning problem. We're not using the right channels. We're not using the right headlines, because we need to get better quality leads into that funnel.
Cool. Makes sense. So at some point you got funded. What changed?
Well, the team got bigger. Yeah, I think I've always been a little bit resistant to funding. I think, especially in the United States, startups are addicted to VCs and funding.
Yeah, somehow it's funny is that, hey, I just sold 30% of my company. So it's like, why are you celebrating? It's just...
Yeah. And most of the time that money went back on the balance sheet. It didn't go into the founders' pockets either, right? So that was one of the things that we wanted to do if we raised money. Was Kevin and I, my co-founders, said that we wanted to take secondary capital, because for us it was just a way to de-risk and say, okay, we're going to sell our shares. Some of it, or a good portion of it, should go into our pockets so that we can, safely grow the company without needing to get acquired or needing to sell it one day. We can kind of have enough money to really just try to go big and not worry too much. So that was one of the things that obviously changed. That was life-changing for Kevin and I. In terms of the company, though, the funny thing was we really thought that just having money in the account would somehow translate to growth, because a lot of startup founders look at that sort of rocket fuel, they call it, and think that money in the bank equals higher growth. And what we found was, we got the money in the bank, we started spending it, we started hiring, we started buying more expensive tools, and it doesn't translate into revenue unless you've got a really strong foundation. So for us, where we had rewritten our product, we decided to move up market and go after kind of bigger customers, we completely missed that. We blew our projections, and we just thought that the money was going to translate instantly into growth, and it didn't. There was a lot of foundational work we had to work through for, even till now, to try to start hitting that growth more consistently.
Got it. Well, I know the time is almost up. So how about you give us some of your favorite books about sales or SaaS in general? Yeah. Besides the one you wrote, of course.
Oh, yes, that's right. I think my book would probably be good for like really early stage founders. There's a little bit about scaling, but it all depends where you're at in your business. I hope you don't mind if I tell people.
Absolutely not. That was the next point. So
sure, yeah. I wrote a book earlier this year called Free Trials and Tribulations: How to Build a Business While Getting Punched in the Mouth. And it's kind of a little bit of a personal memoir about kind of my personal journey of being a founder. And then there's some practical takeaways and lessons for people starting companies. And it's actually a really short read. You could read it on a plane, short plane rides. So people can check that out. In terms of other books that I had read, I usually go back to a lot of common ones. Actually one I read last year was Impossible to Inevitable.
Yep.
Same writers as Predictable Revenue, which is really good if you're trying to build a SaaS sales team. Learned a lot of things.
Yeah, and Jason. Yep.
I'm currently reading, for those who can see this, Sales Management Simplified, Mike Weinberg. This is really good. In terms of SaaS in general, lean analytics is really good for early stage founders, just in terms of what do you measure? You can't measure everything at once. So that's really good. I think that's all I can think of right now.
Give you 2 more seconds, no?
Okay. Let me see. I like a lot of founder story stuff. Like I read Rand Fishkin's book last year. What was it called? Lost and Founder.
That's right.
Very good. I started reading Principles by Ray Dalio. That was a hard one to get through. That was a lot
It's a big one. I got it on my desk. I'm still trying to grab all the courage to actually go through it. Yes.
Absolutely. It's a big one. You know what I think that is? I think it's more of a reference book. It's like trying to sit down and read an encyclopedia. You actually kind of have to wait until there's something you're thinking about and then use the index and then go to that principle.
Interesting.
Really tough to sit down and read.
Got it. Well, Kyle, if people want to reach out to you or wants to know more about your company, what should they do?
Yeah, so if people are interested in the product Proposify, which is sales proposal software to make that process simpler, they can go to proposify.com, which is proposify.com. And if they want to check out my blog or whatnot, they can just go to kyleracki.com, and there's some links to check out the content.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kyle, for being on the show today.
My pleasure, Jeremy. Thanks for having me.
This episode of Lifetime Value is brought to you by Proposify. Proposify improves sales productivity so your team spends less time creating proposals and more time selling. Start your free trial at proposify.com and be sure to hit the subscribe button so you never miss a single episode.